Here we are again in our test scene, and I want to briefly just talk about light types in Cinema 4D. And here under main light, actually all this time we used area light. And I really prefer this area light because it is the most realistic type of lightening that you can get. And all other lights are really to achieve some sort of effect, and they are really self-explanatory. Okay, this spotlight will create a spot of the light. This infinite light will create an even illumination across the scene, which I almost always avoid to use simply because it washes out depth information from the scene. However, in release 12 there is a special type of lighting you can use. You can actually use real world data. And by that I mean you can load this IES file. You can find it here. First you have to set your light type to IES file. And now here under Photometric tab you will find the option to load a file name. And just to avoid some technical geeky stuff, these IES files are made by a light fixture or light bulb manufacturers and exactly represents what you can find in their nature. So it will describe for Cinema 4D what is the shape of the light, what is the intensity light, and so many other factors you don't even have to worry about. So this is the most realistic lighting. I'll load a simple test IES file which I found on some light fixture manufacturer's site, and here you will get some values and you can actually preview how the light looks like. So let me do a small test render and you will see something. And currently this is really underlit, it's really dim. And if I disable that and zoom out a bit, you will actually see the first little thingy that you have to be aware with. I will just turn off this support light just to don't have it in the way. Okay, so I'll turn it off both in render, both in viewport. If you want to use IES lights, consider that this blue guy, this Z-axis, the orientation of the light. So let's orient that, so be aware of that. And now you can actually see there is a real world light. And watch what happens if you render. And you can see it's completely overblown. And there is a relationship here that you have to understand. When you are working with these photometric lights, they work according to a real scale. So for example, now this light exhibits too much brightness. That's simply because our objects are too small. Press Ctrl D and change the document scale from centimeters to meters. Watch what happens. The lighting has changed. Okay? But in fact, light didn't change. All the values in the light stay the same, but the scale has changed. So imagine you really can't light the whole stadium with a single light bulb. Okay? That's the connection. So for example, if I put here kilometers, so our scene is really, really big, and this sphere is giant sphere in kilometers, you can actually see we lose all light information simply because that light, that some standard light cannot illuminate kilometers of the area. Okay, so be aware of that. If you want to really exploit these IES lights to maximum extent, I suggest you really consider scene scale. So if you are using metric values and you are doing some objects, really consider their actual size. For example, bed cannot be 2 by 2 centimeters. It's somewhat more like 2 meters by meter. That is really important with these photometric lights, and they can produce fantastic, really accurate, realistic results. And that is a really nice addition in release 12. In this lesson I want to talk about HDR images, which can really improve the render quality of your objects. Firstly, we have to discuss what the HDR map is. Well, to put it as simple as I can, the HDR map is a simple image that contains a really wide range of intensity. Okay? That would be the most simplest explanation. So for example, in a standard image, you would have somewhat short range of intensities. Let's say, for the sake of this tutorial, it's not really technically correct, but you'll really get what I mean. Let's say that in standard images, you have a value of intensities between 1 and 100, where 1 is lowest and 100 is the maximum amount of brightness. In HDR images, you can have from 1 to say 1000 or maybe 10,000. So you have a really high dynamic range of intensity. And that can produce really nice results because in the real world there is no even distribution of light. Let's just dissect this shader. This is the standard glass shader with this environment channel added up. So this is common glass. It's 95% transparent. It has a refraction value of 1.51. And its brightness is controlled with this Fresnel. The only addition to this glass shader is this spectral shader that I loaded in really somewhat attempt to get some sort of dispersion and those rainbow effects inside the glass and stuff like that. I also turned shadows off just to have some render speed, and you can see the result now. It looks nice. You can actually say it's a glass, and but it really doesn't strike you as something really good or realistic. And the reason why I use these standard values is to show you how little these settings here in transparency and reflection actually have with achieving a nice glass. The secret is in this environment channel. So let me clear that spectral shader and I will load an image, because that HDR maps are actually images also. So let's load it. You can find many of these HDR maps on the internet. And see, now it will ask me if I want to copy a document location. I will say no for now. And now you can see something happening. Now I got many reflections based on that image, and you can see that image here. Let me put this to flat, and simply I will open a window and just scale it so you can see what those images look like. And that's the HDR map. I believe this one comes with Cinema 4D, so you can find it here in your preset browser. And this is way too bright, and you want to cut down on that strength, but be sure to put this brightness to 0, otherwise it will wash out this image. So let's try something like 50% first and see what we get. Yeah, it could be acceptable. Let's try 25. Not quite there. Let's try 15. Well, this could work, but it's not really the way I want it. And maybe you will find scenes that this method, so loading HDR map in this environment channel, really work, and it's all scene dependent. And in this case, I want to really illuminate the scene with this HDR map. So let me clear that channel. And just for the sake of the tutorial, I will turn out those lights just to show you something. And you will have a completely black screen because you don't have lights in the scene. If you have lights in your scene, then here under render settings, you have to disable this default light. Okay, that's the standard Cinema 4D light that is by default activated if you have no lights in the scene. Let me just show you. And we will get a default light. I always turn it off, so it doesn't bother me. So let's first, just to be sure, let's turn off this environment channel. And to illuminate the scene with the HDR map or any other image, if you prefer, but they're almost always HDR map are used because of that high dynamic range. You can do it by creating a sky object. Don't mistake that for this create sky option. That will create a sky you can play with and actually set the time of day, and we will cover this later. But under this scene, create a sky object. So you can now actually see we have a sky object here, and sky it by itself illuminates the objects in the scene. So this sky will generate light from all over in all directions. And you can see in Attribute Manager there are no really settings for this sky, so we have to use something else. And the general workflow is to create a material, to load an HDR map in color or luminance channel. In this case I will use luminance. And to put that material on a sky object, you will see somewhat different results, because now this sky will emit, it will generate this amount of brightness that is set here by this material. So let's put 500 here just to show you the difference, and you can see that you can now control the amount of light that is emitted from this sky object. So let's undo that. We'll stick to 100 at first. Now let's load our HDR image here and see what do we get. I will say no here and watch what happens. Now we have really interesting reflections here. And now if you enable your lights, watch what happens. You have some really nice realistic glass results. So as you can see, this can yield really nice results. And imagine that you have textures and other objects in the scene, and this would really bring it to life. Of course, you can play with the strength value, even blur this a bit to get somewhat blurred results. It all depends what you find appealing. Okay, so HDR map and HDR lightning is really simple. There is no secret to it. It's that simple. And once we get to play a bit with the global illumination, you will see really how HDR can really bloom out the scene and bring some really good results. Okay, so let's go to our next lesson.